Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works, where we have the answers and they're on the house. Welcome to this week's Mortgage Minute, coming to you from toasty Palm Springs in the greater Coachella Valley area. Although we have a little bit of a cool off, we're only at about 106, 108 range. A few days ago, we were 112 plus, so a little bit of a cool down, relatively speaking. The other thing, too, I want to mention, today's a holiday. Uh, Known as Juneteenth. I think probably most of you have heard of that. Not a really well-known holiday yet, because for one thing, it's a new holiday. It was established by Congress June 16th of 2021. It's also known as Freedom Day or Emancipation Day or Jubilee Day. And what it has to do with this was first celebrated in Texas right after the Civil War, or right at the end of the Civil War, the aftermath of on that date in 1865, U.S. General Gordon Granger, with his troops, headed to Texas to basically declare the remaining enclave of slaves, which were in Texas, were free as per the 1862 Emancipation Proclamation. So that's what established that date. So for those of you who are lucky enough not to have to work today and are able to celebrate the holiday fully, then have fun with that and remember the historical significance of that date. It's pretty important in our history. So with that, I want to go ahead and get into what's going on with the bond market and the interest rate market. So as Jeff does, first of all, is he'll bring up our rate grid, and it's just more of the same, folks. Interest rates are pretty stable. We're in all facets, conforming 30-year fixed, the buy downs, 15-year fixed are all pretty much at the same levels in the sixes, mid sixes. In the case of FHA, right around, right under 6%, VA at 6%. So kind of a broken record, right? But, this is a good thing. What this means is rates are pretty stabilized. In fact, I went back and looked at where rates have been since the first of the year. And other than a very brief kind of deep dip in April, early April, rates have been within about a zero point 0.4 range all throughout this year. So I call that a good thing, because that stability at least takes out at least one element of uncertainty if you're considering buying a home. So if you look at the bond chart, it kind of portrays that picture. Yes, the bond yields were lower at the end of last week. They did creep up a fair amount this week. But one of the things you have to keep in mind, by the way, when you're looking at charts like this, you can sometimes realize that the charts are intentionally made with a scale that differs from day to day. This looks like pretty big movements, but when you really kind of look at the yield numbers on the right side, from high to low, we're only talking about zero point 0.2 range from 430 to 450. But because they have that scale, that range scale so narrow, it looks like these are big movements, when in fact, over this last few days, things really have not moved much at all. And of course, today, the bond markets, the financial markets are closed because of the Juneteenth holiday. So we've had no change in rates today. Basically, what we just showed you were left over from end of business yesterday, the last day the market was open. And of course, tomorrow the market will be open again after the holiday. So in terms of economic data points, there's actually a fair amount of them, considering it's a somewhat of a shortened week with the holiday today. So let me show you a few of them. Most of them are going to sound kind of like a downer, because a lot of these numbers are down. Retail sales fell 0.9% in May after falling 0.6 in April. So that suggests some weakness in the retail segment of the economy. Industrial production, it fell 0.2%, second decline in 3 months. So that suggests some weakness obviously in the industrial sector. A little tongue tied there. Home builder confidence. So one headline describing it as it's plummeted, which to some degree it has, not relatively from the previous month, 35 to 32, but relative to what is considered a good number, it's 50. 32 is a pretty low number. So yeah, the home builders are pretty grumpy right now. They've got some excess inventory. It's getting harder to sell homes, but you know what? I keep saying it. Home builders, they jump into action and they are going to offer incentives to get those homes moved. We are handling some loans for buyers of new homes, and the incentive amounts that we're seeing in our loan files for these new home buyers, ranging from $20,000 to $35,000. And a lot of that is those incentives are for homes priced in the 5 to 800. So that's a pretty good incentive amount for that price level. So home builders understand that strategy to get their homes sold. We keep trying to convince the resale markets, realtors, and their sellers, and the buyers that they ought to look at the same thing. Housing starts fell 9.8% in May, down to 1.2 million, and yet all these down numbers. Get this: the Atlanta Fed is still forecasting. In fact, they updated their forecast at the beginning of June, uh, forecasting the GDP for the second quarter, which ends soon, June 30. They're forecasting GDP growth to be 4.2%. That is huge when you consider that May was flat. So, and that's an increase in their forecast. Before June, they were forecasting 3.8. So, kind of odd that we're hearing these current, reduced down numbers for some of these financial data points or economic data points, and yet the Atlanta Fed is telling us we're going to be really happy with a very high growth number in the second quarter. So, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And then lastly, we did have a Fed meeting this week, a meeting of what's called the Federal Open Market Committee. The conclusion of that meeting yesterday was the Fed's Chairman Powell announced that they were holding holding the Fed funds rate steady, so no change. And then, of course, you could hear in the news that there's this grumpy guy that lives in a big White House in Washington, D.C. He was not too happy about not having a downward revision in the Fed funds rate. So we'll have to see and see if that might happen at the next meeting. But again, the Fed's going to say, look, we need more evidence of inflation under control, which frankly, we've got pretty good evidence that it is under control. But I think they still want to see a little bit more closer to the target. We don't have much to go. And maybe once that happens, they'll loosen up a little bit so that we can see some improvement in the Fed funds rate. Again, doesn't mean an immediate improvement in mortgage rates, long-term mortgage rates, but it helps. It's the right direction, and eventually that'll trickle through. So with that, we're going to bring Jeff in so we can have our discussion a little bit more about reverse mortgages. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Art. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, I'm just curious if you had happened to watch. You didn't say anything about sports today. I was really like thrown off. I'm like, we've got to have some sports. You didn't say anything.
Well, actually, happy to report after getting swept by the lowly Baltimore Orioles last weekend or earlier this week. Uh, yeah, last weekend. The Angels head to New York and they swept the Yankees.
Whoa, sweeping the Yankees. That's pretty amazing.
So they're back in third place, and actually they're only 1.5 games out of a wild card spot. So we have hope.
That's good. Hey, did you happen to catch the U.S. Open at all?
I
The U.S.
did.
golf.
Yes. Yeah,
Was
that was
that any
amazing.
good?
That was amazing. Yeah, and that winning putt was remarkable. Really good.
I'm
Unbelievable.
so I'm so happy. I thought for sure the golf gods were not going to allow him to win that tournament, and
Oh,
boy, they certainly. Thank goodness for rainstorms. Who
oh, for
says
sure.
a little break isn't good for you? But
Exactly.
yeah, I'm interested in talking about something today that is, I think, for especially for senior homeowners, people thinking about retirement, it's kind of on their minds. And we've talked about this before, but if this is your first go away, it's like a lot of people, it says how to retire without fearing this. And that I think you've shared a number. It's like what 71% of people are concerned about running out of money before they run out of life
Yep,
is,
exactly right.
yeah, that's,
Yeah,
that's pretty scary. And yet there's an answer. And hopefully today you're going to share that and really let people understand they don't have to have this fear. There
right.
are opportunities, especially for senior homeowners. So if you're ready,
Exactly.
let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Well, the first thing is how to retire without this fear. And I'm just going to ask you a series of questions. So I wrote these down in my words. Is that Art, people naturally look forward to retirement even early on in life. They start talking about retirement, but this is causing them sleepless nights. What is this?
Well, you're right. The sleepless nights among senior homeowners are for real, and a lot of it has to do with actually a multitude of factors, Jeff. There are several things that they are in fear of, and so it can keep them up. The most important one, the biggest one, you just mentioned it, is the fear of running out of money. When polled, senior homeowners by a margin of 71% fear running out of money. So that's their biggest fear by far. And related to that is fear from the rising cost of living. And of course, that's obviously directly correlated to running out of money. The cost of living has gone up quite a bit, as we've all heard from various media reports and so forth. And more importantly, that we felt like going to the grocery store and the talk about $12 eggs and so forth. So that really causes fear among senior homeowners, because most of them, of course, are unlimited income, and so that's a much bigger factor in their daily lives than maybe some of the rest of the population. And with some, there's the uncertainty about Social Security. Now, I tend to think that Social Security will get fixed. I think the government's not going to just let it collapse. At least we hope not. But that is a real fear when you're with some of these senior homeowners. So they have that concern that what if Social Security gets depleted and suddenly that check doesn't show up? So that's a real concern, and that's pretty high on the list of concerns that we're talking about. Market volatility. If you're fortunate enough to maybe own a home with extreme equity, you got a very small mortgage, or your home's free and clear, and you're fortunate enough to have some money in the bank, IRAs, investment accounts, and so forth. Market volatility is a real fear. So that's something that has to be considered as a senior homeowner when you're considering what your options are. And of course, we know that by recent experience. For when Trump, the president, announced his tariff strategy, it caused some real stomach aches with the stock market, and we saw people's portfolios drop by 10-15% in value. So for those senior homeowners fortunate enough to have those kind of assets, that can be a real fear. And of course, a reverse mortgage can be a helpful tool for that scenario. And then another thing that I've been seeing a fair amount of, which is a little scary, is the amount of debt going into retirement that some households, some families have. I'm seeing some folks who are, at retirement age, certainly at reverse mortgage eligibility age, 62 or more, and because maybe their income has been diminished or reduced to some degree, they're more limited on their income. Some of these households have had to incur probably excessive amount of debt just to try to meet living expenses and so forth. So that can be a real issue that they have a fear of, and what we're going to be talking about can help address that. And of course, just lack of a clear plan. I mean, I think senior homeowners, of course, if you're fearing running out of money, you're worried about everything costs so much. You're worried about, is my check going to keep arriving and so forth. You've got to put all that together and try to focus on what kind of plan can be developed to address all of those fears. And that's where I think we can come in. I think if you have a trusted advisor, or if you don't, we can certainly connect you with one and have a genuine, honest discussion about what your needs are, what your fears are, and how those can be addressed in an effective and a strategic way, so that you can, kind of have those fears diminished or eliminated and be able to live your remaining years comfortably and, have some fun too.
Well, with these fears that they kind of stack up, if you will, like even
Yeah.
just lack of a clear path. What options are out there when it comes to a senior homeowner who has a home and maybe very limited income, but they see they've got a lot of equity in their homes?
Yeah. And there are options. And in fact, it's interesting because the process, oftentimes with a senior homeowner who's got lots of that equity and they do want to tap into it, in part because there's so much misinformation about reverse mortgages, that's causing still a majority percentage of the senior homeowner market, the public, to be fearful of the product and tend to want to shy away from that. But they'll yet still want to look into, what can I do to access my equity? Well, the most common things, and other than the reverse mortgage product, we'll put that on hold here for a second. You can get a fixed rate second or a regular HELOC. Now that's getting a loan as well. The difference is those types of loans are traditional in the sense that you've got to make a monthly payment. So that those are the two obvious things that happen, that we will get an initial inquiry for. Hey, I want a second mortgage, either a fixed or a variable rate HELOC, because I need to get some money. And then the other option is just a traditional cash out refinance, get a first mortgage with cash out. Either get a new first mortgage if you're free and clear on the home, and that mortgage, of course, is providing you cash, but you got to make a payment. Or you've got a small mortgage and you're willing to give up that low rate on that small mortgage because you need another 150 grand. You get a cash out refinance, a new first to replace your existing first and get the cash out that way. But again, you got to make a payment on that. So that can be a little bit tricky. And in that respect, you've got to consider, therefore, if you pursue any of these other options, what does that do in terms of impacting long-term affordability? If you go the traditional route and you take out a loan with payments, are you going to be able to handle that going into the future, in particular, while you're also having to manage your taxes, your insurance, upkeep to the home, and so forth? So that you've got to be real certain about what option is out there that will also address that long-term affordability question, because that can be real and it can be significant. Legacy planning, you've got to take into account. And let me tell you, I think most senior homeowners do, who have heirs, who have children, et cetera. I think they kind of focus on this almost to their own detriment. Legacy planning, of course, is in reference to, as a senior homeowner, you do have to start thinking about, planning for the future and your passing and what's going to happen with your assets and how you're going to basically make sure your heirs are taken care of. And in some cases, that concern about the legacy planning process and wanting to protect your assets, whether they're liquid financially or financial liquid assets or the equity in your home, some senior homeowners, I think, can get overly concerned about making sure their heirs are taken care of, but at their own detriment now today, in terms of addressing their financial needs, so that they can actually enjoy their remaining years comfortably. So sometimes there's a little bit of a conflict there, and that's something to keep in mind as you're considering how do you get that equity out of your home. There is housing market risk. If you get a HELOC or a home equity fixed rate loan, or you refinance into a new first mortgage to get cash out, or if you got a reverse mortgage, you have to worry about what happens if your home value drops significantly. Of course, we all remember 2008. Now, of course, think about it. That's been almost 20 years ago, but it's still fresh enough in everybody's mind. The worry is, could that happen again? Well, if you go the more traditional route, assuming you can qualify for a HELOC or a fixed rate loan or a new first mortgage cash out refi, if that home value drops below what you owe, you have no recourse. You still owe that loan, and you've got to make those payments, and you got to pay it back. Now, eventually, home value will come back up, and maybe you can wait that out if you're still around, and be okay. Because after all, those low values of '08, we've come back to those values and well beyond. So in less than 20 years, so it can't happen. Of course, when you're a senior homeowner, you have a little different time horizon in terms of thinking about those things. But housing market risk can be real. But on a reverse mortgage option, that's not something to worry about, which we can talk about more later. So, and then finally, you've got to consider, tax and benefit implications. What's the benefit of, accessing your equity various ways? What's the tax implications versus the benefit? When you get a reverse mortgage, of course, that's going to allow you to access your equity for cash money, which can be provided to you in a multitude of ways, and that's generally non-taxable income. So that's a benefit. The only thing to watch out for is, in some cases, getting a reverse mortgage can affect your Medicaid eligibility. So that is something to pay attention to, and of course, we can help you with that. So that's really the issue. The final issue is strategic timing. I would urge that what you don't want to do is wait and use this reverse mortgage as a last resort, last minute option. Move it up more to the forefront of your future financial planning. Use it as a strategic part of your financial planning. That's going to make you much better off to deal with those, remaining senior years and be able to do so comfortably without significant risk and without the fear that you otherwise would have if you don't keep in mind all of these things I just mentioned.
Well, Art, when it comes to a reverse mortgage, I want to ask you something about the idea of a reverse mortgage versus HELOCs and refinancing. Because I know there's something tricky there that, as senior homeowners are, let's say the income has gone down, the wealth is there, it's in their home, but typically to qualify for these, don't we have to have a nice income to cover that? And is that a problem?
Well, absolutely. In fact, that's what happens quite often. When we end up originating a reverse mortgage, it's not uncommon for that to have occurred because that senior homeowner first came to us and said, "Hey, I own a home that's worth 950,000, and I have a $200,000 mortgage on it. And I can handle the payments on that okay, but I need to get some cash out. I want a $250,000 home equity line of credit."
Mm.
So we'll say, okay, and we'll show them the numbers. And then we look at, they decide they want to pursue it. We look at their ability to qualify. And here's the problem. An equity loan, second mortgage, whether it's a fixed rate or a HELOC, you have to go through the ability to repay qualifying guidelines. So we have to thoroughly document your income to establish that you have a certain specific amount you're receiving on a recurring monthly basis, stable over a long period of time. And then we have to evaluate your other consumer debt payments and your existing first mortgage payment, if there is one, plus the equity loan payment that you're applying for. Put it all together, and is those payments, monthly payments for everything divided into your income, is that ratio going to be under, say, 50%? If
Mm.
it's not, you can't get that HELOC or fixed rate loan or that cash out refi. You don't qualify because your debt ratio is too high. We run into that quite often because, again, their income is more limited. Now they get very upset and frustrated, because in their logic, they're like, well, wait a minute. I owe 150 in my first. I want 250 in my second. It's 400. My house is worth almost a million. Why isn't that good enough? Well,
Mm.
that's all about the history of '08 crash, and people were qualified without determining if they can qualify for the payment. Now you have to do that. So that becomes the segue into, okay, we can't get you qualified because your debt ratio is 68 on a HELOC. But you know what? You have enough equity. We can get you a reverse mortgage that will pay off your current first, give you the remaining portion as a line of credit. Again, that HELOC that you wanted, and you can set that up with a zero balance initially. And the benefit of that is it grows over time, and then you have it there to use when you need it. It's sort of
Mm.
basically a rainy day fund, almost like a savings account secured by your home. So that's the way to. So that's how, yeah, I want a HELOC turns into, give me a reverse mortgage that still gives me a line of credit that's actually better than a HELOC, because the reverse mortgage line of credit grows over time. The traditional HELOC does not.
It just seems like that's part of that strategic planning and not waiting till the last minute to think, okay, well, this is my last resort. Let's go
Right.
with the reverse mortgage versus saying, wait a minute. If I kind of reverse that, no pun intended, that it could turn things out, or things could turn out totally different.
Exactly right. Yeah, and that's what we try to get folks to consider and kind of open up their minds about a little bit, is that don't wait for this as a last resort when money is really tight and you're kind of in a panic.
Mm.
You want to kind of not get to that level of anxiety before you start pursuing the benefits of this kind of product.
Yeah. Well, here's another question that comes up when you talk about using the equity in one's home as a retirement tool. Or excuse me, I'm sorry, wrong. You already answered that. What's the number one most misunderstood thing about a reverse mortgage that if you could help people understand, what would it be? Because you're in the trenches, you're doing this every day, so I'm curious what that is.
It's an easy one. The most misunderstood feature or characteristic of a reverse mortgage that is completely misunderstood is you still own your home. When you get a reverse mortgage, you are the owner of your home. The bank does not own the home. I actually had this experience recently when I had to explain to a prospective reverse mortgage customer that, and they had this concern that if you get a reverse mortgage, you no longer own your home. The bank owns your home. And then further, they've heard that if they don't maintain that home because they no longer own it, the bank does. If you don't maintain it adequately, like, I mean, exaggerated to the point of, you want to say, I mean, it's almost as bad of, some folks out there think, well, if I don't mow my lawn, the bank's going to take my home because I got a reverse mortgage and I didn't mow my lawn. Now I'm exaggerating, but the point is there's that fear, and it's unfounded entirely. A reverse mortgage is like any other. It's secured by your home. So if you have an existing first mortgage that will be paid off as part of a reverse mortgage strategy, well, your existing first mortgage is secured by your home. It's a recorded deed of trust in California. So it's a mortgage lien, a lien against your house. But did you consider at the time you got your existing first mortgage that the lender was going to own your home? No, it never occurred to you. Why? Because they don't. It's just a secured lien. And a reverse mortgage is also just a secured lien. So the idea that you're going to have the bank or the government, actually that's the bigger concern. Even the government's going to own your home, because the core product is, as we talked about before, the FHA HECM, the home equity conversion mortgage. So it's, oh my gosh, the bank or the government's going to own my home. I'm going to lose all control. It is completely not true. Never was true. And so that's something we continue to try to fight through and raise that awareness, so that folks will at least more seriously, and I think more deliberately, look into the product and talk to somebody like us, and or their trusted financial advisor. And by the way, to borrow from Jordan Levine, the chief economist at Carr, maybe that person shouldn't be your brother-in-law, but which is kind of a funny way to look at it. But you get what I'm saying, is that make sure you've got a trusted advisor that's going to look out for your interests as the senior homeowner. I think I can't underscore that enough. Sometimes a senior homeowner gets kind of diverted into not thinking about their own needs first, and I think that's an integral part of considering a reverse mortgage product.
Well, Art, I want to make full disclosure. You helped my wife and I qualify for a reverse mortgage product. And my wife was very much on that fear factor because she had heard the horror stories from, that might have happened 25 years ago.
Right.
And the rules have changed. And I said, wait a minute, before you make a decision, I said, let's talk to Art and
Right.
find out about it. But not only that, but I understand that when somebody gets a reverse mortgage, before you actually give that, don't they have to go through some counseling, and all these things are answered as well?
Exactly. The very first step in a reverse mortgage process, of course, we will prepare a proposal for the borrower, for the homeowner. So they'll get a chance to review that. We'll review that with them. We'll go through that in great detail, and it's a significant document. I mean, the whole thing is over 100 pages, which can be daunting in and of itself. Although a little bit more than half of it is actual a basically a brochure, if you will, or maybe better called a handbook, because it's literally about 50 pages. Um, and it was prepared or published by HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, which FHA is a division of, that goes into great detail the core FHA product, the HECM, home equity conversion mortgage. So it goes into the product in very much detail, and answers pretty much all the questions you can imagine. It's a very good consumer-oriented document. Now, it is lengthy, but we urge the homeowner to read that thoroughly to get an even greater understanding after we spend time with them. And then let's say we get to that point, they've got the proposal, we've reviewed it, they read all the material, they're prepared to move forward. The very first step is you need to get counseling. And this is essentially home ownership counseling that's tailored to the reverse mortgage type product. And so you do have to take that first step. You're given a list of 10 counseling agencies that can provide what you need that's acceptable for the reverse mortgage. And thankfully, in almost all cases, this counseling is done online or by phone. You don't have to go anywhere. It doesn't take that long, maybe about an hour, but they dive deep again into the reverse mortgage, both the specific HECM product and the product in general, because there are other non-FHA reverse mortgage products that we can offer. But the point is, the counseling gets on into all that again in pretty good detail, so that by the time you're finished with that and you get your certificate, which we do need to have a copy of for your reverse mortgage loan file, once you complete that, then we've got a waiting period, a cooling off period of 7 days before we can go any further and get your application and start what we call ordering services like a credit report and an appraisal on the property. So yes, that's a very important step. And again, it's designed with the homeowner in mind for your protection, to make sure you are fully aware of the product in every way, and that you are therefore reassured that it is actually a very beneficial product. Again, we can't emphasize enough, in particular if you use it strategically in your financial planning.
Before I go into this last question, I just want to ask you a couple of other questions. How long have you been in the lending business?
Well, let's see, January of '82. So I think I counted with my fingers, and I'm in my 44th year. So
When it comes to something like that, if you, the reason I bring this up is this: many times we hear this statistic that says if you start a business, about 90% of them will fail in the first year, and then the other 10% within the next 5 years. When you come across someone like Art, who's been doing this for 44 years, I'm thinking he's somebody you can trust. And I'm not just asking you to blatantly trust him, but I would say give him the opportunity. If you're in this situation and you're thinking, gosh, you know what? It would be nice if we have some of that equity in our home that we could actually leverage. But before we do that, I want to ask you this last question. When it comes to reverse mortgages, Art, what advice would you share that would help them make a decision to leverage their home equity and make retirement fears around money be greatly reduced?
yeah, very good question, Jeff. And of course, I had to make a list because yes, folks, uh, this is not a political debate, so I did have a little bit of a sense of what Jeff was going to ask me. But these are important questions, and we want to be able to convey them in as simple terms as possible, and not complicated language, because this really is a pretty simple concept and a relatively simple product. It's all a function of understanding the jargon and getting some plain spoken explanation of how all this works. So that's what we try to do. The most important thing advice I could share in terms of this kind of this kind of product is, again, and I've already touched on it, use it as a planning tool. Don't use it as a last resort. I would say that's the majority of the what a majority of homeowners make the mistake of is putting it off because they're sort of biased by this bad information they've heard for years, and they just don't want to focus on it. So don't do that. Bring it up earlier in your. I mean, because most of us, Jeff and I'm sure, we're at the age where we got to be planning this kind of stuff for our senior years, and most anybody who's kind of rational is going to do that. You certainly should bring in the reverse mortgage product as part of the discussion to decide if it could be a beneficial part of your plan. So that's the most important thing. Planning tool, not a last resort. Um, the other thing about a reverse mortgage is, again, I touched on it earlier, even if you don't feel like you have a need, but if your home's free and clear or you have a very small mortgage, you can pay it off with a reverse and then get additional cash, you're going to say, well, I don't need it now. That's okay. Get it now anyway. The benefit is if you don't need to use that line of credit, the unused portion grows over time. So you can get it in place earlier in your years and watch it grow. You're not incurring any interest expense because you haven't drawn against the line of credit. It's a zero balance. So you don't have interest accrual to worry about. And then when you do finally get to a point where you need the money, it's there, and the amount that's there at that point is going to be larger or higher amount than what was there when you first got the loan. So that's a really important feature I can't stress enough. Think of your equity in your home should be thought of as a retirement asset. You've got an IRA, you may have a 401k. I would say a reverse mortgage ought to be a HIRA, a house individual retirement account. Yes, it's more illiquid as it currently is configured because you don't have the reverse mortgage in place. But by getting that reverse mortgage, it's becoming part of your, the proceeds from the reverse mortgage becomes part of your retirement asset. So I can't underscore that enough. That's how you should think about it, not just a last resort product. And now, if you're going to do it, if you're going to get one, and if you're going to use it earlier in your years as part of your strategic plan, keep the family informed. Because otherwise they might think, oh, you're broke, you must be financially in dire straits, and that's why you're getting this loan. No, no, no. If you're in particular being strategic about it, let them know. Let them know you're not broke, you're not in dire straits, but you want to maintain your level of your current level of living and so forth, and you don't want to be in a bad situation later. So that's why you're getting this product now to be part of your plan to live comfortably for the duration. So let the family know. And of course, at the same time, as you do that, I would again emphasize, make sure though you keep the focus on you as the homeowner, as the borrower. The benefit of this product should be directed toward the benefits to you primarily, not to your heirs. And there's a happy medium there that in most cases families work out and everybody's happy. Um, and then the last thing, and again, we touched on it earlier, this product gives you a great opportunity for what we call sequence of return risk. If you're fortunate enough to have investment accounts, in your retirement age, particularly if you're after 70, maybe you got IRAs and, maybe a regular non-retirement investment account. And of course, in most cases, that's all fully invested in the market. And with that being the case, you might be drawing, X amount of dollars per month as living money. I call it lunch money. Maybe it's $5,000 a month. Well, the problem with that is if you have a downturn in the market from your accounts that are fully invested, that can accelerate depletion of those accounts. And then suddenly you could get to that last resort. I'm in a panic because I've run out of money. That fear that we talked about is the biggest fear of all. So be strategic, get the reverse mortgage. Yes, get it as a line of credit. If you don't need the money now, you're still drawing on those other liquid accounts, the IRA, the investment account. And then if we have a downturn like we had just a few months ago, stop those draws out of your investment account, your IRA account, start pulling the same amount out of your line of credit on your HELOC. And then once the market recovers, go back to your original strategy and drawing money out of your investment accounts. The point of all that strategy is you get to overall maintain or preserve your assets, and you're going to be in a better position for all of those assets to grow better over time. So again, you get with a very good financial advisor, we've got a whole presentation we can give to them and to you about sequence of return risk and how a reverse mortgage can help you with that. Just give me a call. I'll be happy to share it with you.
Art, I really appreciate it. I just want to bring up one additional slide here that you've created, and you have a free assessment on how to unlock financial flexibility with our senior homeowner quiz. And it's an assessment. There's only 25 questions, and then they get a customized result for that. And what we've done is we put the link in the comments, and all you have to do is give us your email, because we send you that report in your email, and it takes you about, I think the average is about 2 or 3 minutes to get it done.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Jeff. Yeah, we would urge anyone, if again you're on that fence about whether or not you want to pursue the reverse mortgage, take a look at this assessment. We tried to make it as brief as possible, as thoughtful as possible, so we can get right to the most important questions that you as a senior homeowner are concerned about. Yes, I know that you're worried that if you complete it, that we're going to start hounding you and marketing to you, and you're going to get phone calls and text messages. No, we're not going to do that. Take your time, go through it, use this as an effective tool to help you start the planning process. Once you complete that, yes, you can get more information. We'd be happy at that point to give you a certain or a specific proposal based and tailored on your specific needs. So I can't encourage you enough. Give this a try. We're not going to come after you and harass you to death, but we want you to be aware of this. It'll help you focus on the important questions as a senior homeowner you should be asking, and that may help prompt you to get more strategic about planning for the future.
I mean, isn't the whole process of you being here week in and week out is not to hard sell and chase anybody, but to allow people to get to know you better and see the opportunities they have, whether they're buying a new home, or in this case, we're talking about retirement and we're talking about HELOCs, of saying, hey, you know what? I've spent the last 10 weeks with Art. I feel like I know him, and he's just showing a possibility, and you can call the number on the screen and have a conversation with you.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's what I would want to impress upon everybody who's ever seen the show. It's like, in most cases, I will start off with somebody. It's a conversation. We're just talking about, kind of in general terms about, after the pleasantries of hi, how are you, who referred you to me, and so forth. And we might, talk a little bit about weather and what have you. But the point is, then we kind of, I like to ask some questions, try to be, very direct and understandable questions to try to gather an idea of what their situation is, what they're thinking, what they're worrying about, and what problem they're trying to solve. And so I try to ask questions and then be a very good listener. And then once I get a grasp of what their situation is in a little bit more detail, then I can make some suggestions. And what I like to do quite often is give that person some numbers, so they can see on a piece of paper or on a computer screen the whole full story, the breakdown financially. And then, of course, when I send that, I always urge, hey, let's schedule a call. I want to get on a call with you. I want to walk you through this and do so, in plain language, simple that everyone can understand, so that they really can have all of their fears addressed, and hopefully they'll feel more comfortable. So.
Well, Art, let me ask you a question. Let's say, for instance, we've had quite a large audience on here today, but if they were to just fill out this assessment, get their information, call you, would you be even more prepared if they shared that assessment with you, so you really know where they're at?
Exactly right. Yes, yes, absolutely. That's the thing, is that anytime you're getting a mortgage, ultimately there's a certain amount of money you want, and in order to get it, you got to tell your story. You're telling a story, and part of our job in the specialized piece of the segment of meeting with the borrower face to face at the retail level, we're going to hear their story, and then we're going to counsel them and advise them how we're going to present their story to this lender to get their loan approved. And we're going to counsel them and help them as to what kind of documentation we need to collect to support their story. So that's really why this assessment can be so effective, because it focuses that person to the most important questions that need to be answered if they're going to contemplate this kind of product. And then once we have those answers, I'm better equipped to give them objective advice how to address those concerns as reflected in the assessment. So it's a great tool. We've had very good luck with it, and I would encourage people to give it a try. And again, the next step, we'll just have a conversation. If you don't like how the conversation goes, we conclude it, say thank you for the assessment, and have a great day, and we'll see you soon. I mean, it's really that, we don't want to be kind of hard sell. That's never been my style in 44 years anyway. That's just not how I operate. So because I just don't think that's good. So anyway, I think if people would try it out, I think they'll be pleasantly surprised. So.
Well, again, that link is in the comments. Just click on that link. It'll take you right to the assessments. It's 25 questions. I think it takes about 3.5 minutes to fill it out, if even that. And then you can take a look at that, and it'll give you a breakdown of how that worked out. And then if it's something you say, hey, you know what, we are a potential fit for this, give Art a call. His number is 760-969-5023, or you can email him at art@mwloan.com. Art, I can't thank you enough for today. I think it's been very eye-opening, and really helps alleviate some of those fears. Two things about getting older and not having enough money, and the fear of the unknown about reverse mortgages. You made it very clear. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, Jeff. Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for watching and listening to this week's Mortgage Minute. I hope you have a good rest of the Juneteenth holiday, if you're, again, fortunate enough to be able to celebrate it. Some of us are working. But do have a good celebration today, and be thoughtful about why we have this holiday. And then going into the rest of the week, enjoy your weekend, and then we'll see you again next week on the next edition of the Mortgage Minute. So long. Take care.